My name is Oscar Gutierrez. I'm with Boundary Management Consultants. We have a contract with the Indiana Department of Education to conduct these trainings. The reason that we were selected to conduct those trainings is because historically there hasn't been a fiduciary to the schools. So there have been a lot of schools that have gotten into a lot of trouble because of the facility financings that they got into. Avondale Meadows, Tinley are amongst those that were in some pretty predatory situations. So we are regulated by the SEC and have fiduciary responsibility to our client. In this situation is the Department of Education, and it gets extended to all the grant recipients. So the advice that we're giving you, it's meant to be holistic. It's not it is not meant to be taken as you should be doing this type of financing versus that type of financing. We're just trying to provide a broad overview of what's out there in the market right now and what are some of the best practices. So if anybody has any questions, we can get started. I'll stop in different points and you guys can chime in. Again, the point of grouping the three of you is to allow you guys to share amongst each other some of the difficulties that you're going through, that you ask questions about what you think may be coming up, or just provide some of your experiences in some of the topics. So if nobody has anything before we get started, we can jump right on it. All right, hearing none, let me just share my screen and. All right, can everybody see the screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we already did the introductions and why. As you guys know, charter schools don't get the same level of assistance that public schools do, primarily in the form of property taxes. The biggest difference that you guys know that you face is that charter schools get $750 per pupil, where a public school has the benefit of building as much as they can possibly build and put it on the property tax roll, subject to tax caps. But that is a huge limitation that that limits you guys to what you can and can't do, because it truly is a small business where your head count really dictates the level of facility you can afford. And without going too much into the history of this, I'm going to play a short video and then we can talk about it shortly thereafter, if that's okay. All right, here we go.
Reviewing your current financing structure. One of the most asked questions when reviewing financing structure is, how much can I afford? The rule of thumb is 10 to 15% of your total revenues, but each school's model and operating needs are different. In order to determine what you can afford to spend on a new facility, school leaders should look at their cash flow as a metric for evaluating how much extra per month they have available to spend in a facility investment. Let's review some various scenarios where this could play out. School X is evaluating the following options: rent, lease, or purchasing a building. Renting offers a set amount per month that often includes CAM, common area maintenance, and utilities, simplifying the budgeting process. However, these are typically not sustainable long-term because the rental agreements are short-term in nature and flux as the market values of the property change. Leasing, or lease to purchase, provides longer-term security with fixed facility costs. But the downside of leasing is that your monthly payments do not support an investment in your building or balance sheet, and any leasehold improvements to the facility are for the benefit of the owner of the building. In addition, with lease to purchase scenarios, oftentimes the buyout of the facility at the end of the lease term can be bought for market value plus a premium which is paid to the seller. When purchasing or financing a building, there are some common terms to be familiar with. Term versus amortization. These concepts are often confused because in personal and consumer finance, they often mean the same thing. For example, a 30-year home mortgage is repaid over 30 years. In school building financing, the term may be 10 years, which is the length of the agreement, yet the amortization period may be 30 years, which is the number of years the payments are divided, or the repayment schedule. Interest. Interest, which can be fixed or variable over the life of the term, but applied to the amortization as well. Debt service coverage. This literally refers to how many extra dollars you can afford to spend. This is different from your net income after expenses. Debt service is actual cash dollars that you have available to spend per month on your facility payment. Now that we've established these fundamentals, you can begin to take a look at what you can afford. Typically, a longer amortization period will give you the benefit of flexibility to have a lower monthly payment, but it will cost you more interest in the long run to do so. If you are tight on cash or have little reserves, you need to ensure that your monthly payment is as low as possible. If you are in a lofty cash position, you may be able to have more flexibility to service a higher monthly debt payment, which saves you interest and allows you to own the building sooner. At the end of the day, what makes sense for a school varies depending on the unique needs and opportunities presented to them.
All right, so we'll stop there. Um, I guess I would like to kind of put Jessica on the spot since, you've managed multiple schools and you've done all three. You've leased, you rented, and you've owned. So if you can give us a little bit about your experience and what you think has been the best scenario for you, or when it became the best scenario for you, I mean, it would be very helpful to the rest of the group.
Yeah. First, I can't take credit for the, hang on one second. Sorry, I need to transition really quick. The Mallory project, that was Abigail Overton with Inglewood CDC. We got the very lucky job of just being a tenant there. But at the same time that was going on, we were financing through SCOLA, which was another, not quite as complicated as Inglewood, but definitely challenging in its own right. We always prefer to own our buildings, and that's just a personal preference. Leasing, I think we have a really good partnership with Inglewood CDC over at PR Mallory, so that's been a really good experience for us. But when you lease, you don't get to control your climate and your environment as much as when you own. So that's kind of why if we can own a building, then we do. We decided to stick with a lease for our Inglewood campus because that allows us to partner with Purdue Polytechnic High School, which is our feeder high school for those students. And that partnership was really important to us. So the lease piece of it outweighed the need to own a building.
Thank you. And Catherine, I know you have some things going on, but I know that you are leasing and at the same time have a financing in place. Can you tell us a little about that model and how you have both as part of your school?
Sure. It's not a great model to be clear, but the challenge that we face is as a school in downtown Bloomington, there's very little available to buy. And in order to serve the community that we wanted to serve and to be able to mitigate the costs that come along with things like having to have a separate gymnasium and a playground and those kinds of things, access to the community, the county library, all of the things, campus, IU campus, all of the things we needed to be able to walk to. We had determined a catchment area within which we needed to sit. And as a result of that, leasing really was our only option. Our lease terms are relatively decent. Our initial lease with our main campus, our main building, is through Bloomington Parks and Recreation. So although Parks and Recreation is a division of the city, they operate through their own foundation and board. And so our lease is actually with the Parks Board. It was an initial 10-year lease with 4 or 5 year extensions, and which is fortunate because the increase in each of those 5 years is fairly negligible. I think it went up, I'm going to say $300, around $300 a month when we began our first extension. And that will be for this next 5 years. And rents in downtown Bloomington have skyrocketed. About 18 months to 2 years after we became a school, which was 12 years ago, the property that's immediately adjacent to ours sold for more than any property in downtown Bloomington has ever sold. And as a result, became a high-rise student housing multi-million-dollar project. And then in this last 2 years, the property just north of us adjacent did the exact same thing. It had been valued at about $400,000 and sold for $3 million. So we sit in a spot where purchasing isn't within the realm of possibility for us. And we've had a waiting list of about 300 kids each year, and have been attempting to expand for a number of years. And this last year found sort of the one lone guy who still had a property downtown that he was debating about what to do with. And so we did a lease with him that began just 2020, which is not necessarily the year I recommend expanding in hindsight, but we started the process and had completed it the week prior to state shutdown and before we all knew what tremendous impact would be with COVID. So our student spaces are full. That second building, as I said, is a lease. In both buildings that we lease, we have the right of first refusal to purchase should either owner be willing to sell. At this point, neither owner has been willing to consider that. And in both properties, we have debt associated with the renovations that were necessary to make it be a school. The renovations in both buildings have been 2-stage renovations. So in our main building, we have a loan with IFF that we refinanced about 18 months ago, I think. And then we have a loan with Old National Bank also, which has tax credits associated with it. And then in the new building, the expanded building, we have a loan with Old National Bank that this first year we're paying interest only. After that, we work into decent terms for that renovation, and then we'll complete the renovation over this next year. And to clarify, I said the thing about wouldn't have recommended 2020 as an expansion year. All student spaces are full, so we are at capacity, and we are the number of pupils that we had budgeted for. So that is not the challenge that I reference. The challenges I reference are ones that y'all and we all are facing every day, and so I probably don't need to elaborate on those too much.
Thank you for sharing. And Scott, I'll save some of your experiences for the as we continue here, so we can keep going through this. So this is one that will be a little more relevant to Scott as they're beginning to plan an expansion, and for the other two schools, this may be something that you guys have had to do in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and start the next video.
and 5-year capital planning. In this video, we will discuss capital planning and the role it plays in charter school finance and operations. First, it's important to understand a few concepts regarding capital planning. The first of which is a capital asset. A capital asset refers to a building, property, or equipment that is utilized by an entity over the course of its useful life. This usual life period is generally over several years, but it can vary. Similarly, capital expenditures refers to any expense that supports capital assets or a capital plan. Oftentimes, a capital asset corresponds with a liability on the balance sheet that was used to finance it. It is seldom the case that a building or equipment will be given freely to a school. Therefore, most facilities will have a private activity bond or a bank loan that was taken out to finance the asset. A needs assessment refers to a school's current capital situation and circumstances. What buildings do they lease or own? What equipment do they use or need to fulfill daily operations? What project or maintenance must be completed within the upcoming year? All of these questions are an important component of a capital plan. It is imperative that the board of directors and school leadership take stock of their capital plan before embarking on a comprehensive capital budgeting process. It is important for management to set a capital needs list for immediate capital infrastructure priorities that must be met within the upcoming year. For example, an HVAC system that needs replacing or a new bus to accommodate more students. There are certain capital needs that must be met and must have the funds set aside to do so. Similarly, school leaders should form a wish list for capital wants. This additional list would be beneficial for items that the school would like to implement at some point, but consider such items as more of a desired list if funds permit. For example, a new playground or a college readiness center. The differentiating factor between a capital needs and a capital wants list is the ability to pay for it. Funding must be identified to successfully address capital needs. A capital plan is typically determined on a forward-looking 5-year basis with annual revisions. Unforeseen capital expenditures can wreak havoc on a school if their leadership is not anticipating it in the annual budget. A leak in a ceiling roof or an unexpected technological expense could require urgent monetary resources that can adversely affect a school budget if not planned for in the capital plan. Planning and saving for capital expenditures is non-negotiable. Capital planning can be overwhelming, but it is necessary to achieve a balanced and responsible budget for schools. If you are unsure how to begin this process or unaware of what expenses your faculty might be likely to need, speak to an advisory professional soon.
All right. While that sounds like it's common sense, it typically isn't, because what you need in your building typically needs external consultants, and the market for schools has been dominated by public schools that have a pot of gold per se, where engineers, construction managers have had pretty much to live without any means. They just, whatever they tell the school that they need, they can afford to pay. And it's not the same case when it comes to charter schools. You have a lot of constraints. So having the right team matters. Having the right construction manager that understands the limitations is important. So typically, if there's any construction or expansions in the horizon, we recommend that you form a committee within your school where either a board member with the experience, or you pull a community member with the experience to be able to select the right partner. There's a couple of not-for-profits that do this. IFF is one, CEAS is another. where they will take that owner's rep type of role and help through the process of figuring out who the right partners will be. I'm not an architect. I'm not a construction manager, so it is difficult to determine how much a roof costs without having multiple people tell you and determining from there what the true number is. Scott, you're going through something right now. What would you say has been the most difficult part of picking that external team of consultants to help through the budgeting process of what you need?
The most difficult part of picking a team. Part of it is just identifying what skill sets we have and what time availability we have internally or on our board, because sometimes the skills are there, but the time isn't. And I'm sure everybody who works at a school on this call can appreciate the fact that the day-to-day job of educating tends to be a distraction. And so weeks go by if you're not careful to keep your eye on the ball. Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I think one of the things that really struck me with that video in particular was this trying to balance what's a need versus a want. And even more so when, as we're doing right now, we're trying to plan for a major expansion and renovation. Just to give a little background, we have a purpose-built school building. It's only about half renovated. We really need the other half to accommodate growth. But that doesn't mean that the existing building doesn't have its own needs as well. And so we're constantly struggling to make educated decisions about what we should go ahead and spend money on immediately because it falls in the need category versus what we can delay or defer until it could be part of a larger project where the financing source wouldn't have as much of an impact on our immediate financial situation. And so that tension between, building cash reserves and meeting immediate needs while also providing for the operational costs of the school and educating students today is probably the biggest balancing act that I'm engaged in every day. So I hope that answers your question, but those challenges that the video identified definitely resonated.
Thank you for sharing. I think you guys are going through this as we speak, and the other two school leaders have had to go through this. I would say Catherine not that long ago, since she just moved into her building, and Jessica is. It seems like they're popping a new school just about every year. I don't know how many you're up to now, but every time I look at a different side of Indianapolis, there's a new Paramount there. So I think you got this one down. We talked a little bit about this in the first portion of this on the financing structure, how much you can afford, the importance of the cash flow. But one piece that is important is the fundraising and capital campaigns. Right now through 2020, I think that the fundraising has been a lot tighter for people. And, the question I would have for you guys is, do any of you have a dedicated fundraising arm or a staff member that's purely dedicated to fundraising? Is anybody currently hiring somebody to play that role, or is that something that somebody within the current structure doubles down on, maybe the executive director or a board member? How does your, I guess the question is, how do you handle fundraising?
So for Paramount, we don't budget as if there are fundraising funds coming in. Those are funds that are awesome if they come in, but we don't necessarily add that to our needed income every single year. But we do have a director of advancement, and she primarily works on finding private donors. And then we also, because we're going through strategic planning right now, we're partners with the Mind Trust. We're partners with Charter School Growth Fund. So those are other partners who have given donations for our expansion that Tommy and I tend to interface with the most. But our director of advancement does a lot of work with Lilly, with LISC, United Way, just any other private donors that would be interested in our mission and what we're doing.
One thing that I will say is that, and you can probably share, is typically it will take a couple of years for a role similar to this to pay for itself. It is not an immediate reward where you bring in the FTE and they go out and fundraise enough to cover themselves. It truly is an investment that takes 2 to 3 years to truly begin to pay for itself and have gains. So I always look at a fundraising role as an investment, as a 2 to 3 year investment for it to really come to fruition. As you are all aware, the grant cycles usually takes about a year to even get an answer from all the requests that you put out there. Catherine, you guys have a Lilly grant, correct? I believe.
Yes, we have a Lilly grant to support social emotional learning, counseling, and guidance.
Excellent. And Scott, are you guys currently, do you guys currently have a role dedicated to this, or is that something that it's a group effort within the school?
Yeah, similar to Kathy, we have a director of philanthropy and marketing. But going back to the comment about making sure that there's time available, sometimes that the more immediate stuff can easily take priority in terms of outreach to current families or prospective families and things like that. But what you said about needing to look at it as an investment and sort of building over the course of years is definitely shown itself to be true. I mean, we've had this position only now, we're in our second year with that position. And so we understood that going into it. And we're pretty excited about the fruit that it might continue to bear down the road.
Excellent. Glad you guys went ahead and did that. Let's keep moving along, I think, for the sake of time.
Yeah, I would just add that in 2020, I think for many of us, that, from March on, much of that role for us shifted to creating resources to support families who have been so significantly impacted by COVID. So it has definitely been a dearth in terms of resources that will benefit the budget of the school or the direct contact with the school. So.
I'm assuming you all applied for PPP and received some sort of CARES Act funding as well. Did anybody not seek PPP or CARES Act funding? Okay.
We did both of those things.
I think that a lot of schools that met their goals and were doing well actually saw a little bump from both of those things, because they still, again, I see charter schools as a small business, and it is a revenue-based per pupil funding, and clearly that's not the way to look at a school, and the mission is to educate. But when it comes to numbers, that truly is the genesis of how you budget. But PPP and CARES Act truly put schools that were able to be successful through everything that got thrown at them, and have been able to build a little bit of a rainy day fund from those two items, and hopefully that's somewhat the case for all three of you. Has anybody gotten the PPP forgiven yet? Is that an ongoing process for you all, or how is that going?
We've had ours forgiven.
Good.
We have to.
I know there's quite a few schools still going through the process and have not gotten it forgiven. So it's something that if a business manager was handling and has any questions, it's probably worth talking to a bank or an accounting firm that focuses on charter schools to assist with that process. Whatever small fee they may charge, it's definitely worth having the peace of mind of having that be put away. And I'm also assuming that most of you should be done with your audits at this point, or pretty close to it, I would assume. But I'll go ahead and as we were getting, as I sent out individual messages, I had an attachment of infograph that that broke things down into 3 different school options. It was the new schools, it was established schools, and it was a network of schools. Did you all receive that one-page graphic? Now let me pull it up here for a second, and just to, before I move on to the next section, so we can cover that briefly. Bear with me here. Just bear with me for a second. And anybody that doesn't have this, I'll be happy to send this to you. Yeah, so you should all have received this little quick one-page guide, which sort of kind of goes step by step. This is sort of what we've been discussing on this. But I want to use this real briefly to kind of talk about the next slides that we're going to talk through, and starting from here, then we can migrate. That when I refer to a new school, it is truly a brand new charter school that has no CMO support, and it's within the first 4 years of operation. Assuming the slow growth model of assuming it's a high school, for example, you know, year 1, you do a freshman class of maybe 100. Year 2, sophomore class, you double to 200 until you get the capacity at 400. And then we'll go through the options on the slide. The established schools, when we refer to established schools, what I mean with that is they have at least 4 years of operation. And then you have 2 different types of schools that are established. You have ones that are showing positive enrollment trends, and the ones that are seeing a decline on their enrollment, whether it's because of performance or just increased competition in the area. And then the last model that we will talk about is the CMO or network model. So if you have multiple schools and are doing replication or an expansion, what your options are there. So, and then we'll cover all of these financing options at the bottom. But I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that that is a quick one-page guide that's easy to share with your board or your other school leaders when discussing these topics. And let me go back to the PowerPoint now. Okay. So again, with new schools, you have all had to do this at some point through the creation of your networks, and your options are very limited. You have no credit. You are, if you had something like CSP, is really what's keeping you afloat, and your enrollment is going to be very limited. So what most schools end up doing is either going through they'll rent a small space that they'll be in for 2 to 3 years with the goal of moving. Again, the difficulty with that is that you have to get your students to follow you. The lease to purchase, there's a couple of models out there. There's a for-profit model and a not-for-profit model. So the for-profit, you would have somebody like Turner Agassi, where they'll come in and they'll build you a school. They'll charge you what you can afford. Maybe you'll pay interest only or partial interest, and then the payments begin to scale until they force you to buy, and then buy at a premium. So I highly discourage anybody from using that type of model There's a not-for-profit model similar to that through groups like Charter School Development Corporation, where they'll come in and do the same thing, just a little bit better structured. Again, that is an option that works for people for the first couple of years, but it is not a sustainable model because every time you make payments on that lease, you're not actually accruing any equity on your facility. And when you decide to purchase it, you'll still have to pay a premium, even if it's to a not-for-profit. CDFI loans, those are loans through groups like LISC, IFF. The next one is one that is popular in areas like California, Arizona, Colorado, which is the EB-5 visa loan. What that is if you live in a qualified area that has a certain percent of people living below the U.S. Income, you will get foreign investors to pay. Ideally, you want them to be around 50% of the building, but they could pay up to 100% of the building. I don't recommend that because then you get control and you're ultimately back to the lease to purchase model. But they will finance, but if you finance at least 50% of it with an EB-5 loan, what that is if I'm a foreign investor, I can finance in $900,000 increments to any project in the US that qualifies. You offer them a return on their investment, 3-6%, whatever it may be, comparable to a loan. And what they get in return is they get a visa. And then after a 7-year period, they get a residency. So a lot of wealthy foreign individuals will use this model to pay for their kids to go to college. It is often a easier process for them than having to go through a student visa. They'll just buy a visa, is what this is. And it has been popular in Arizona and California. There hasn't been a transaction here in Indiana yet, but the option is there. I find that process to be intriguing, and eventually somebody will take advantage of it in Indiana. And then your traditional bank financing, which has to have a loan to value. This is usually the problem with schools trying to get a financing through a bank. Banks will look at the value of the building that you're buying. So you can't really look at future value or what the school can afford. It's truly the value of the asset. And then you also have to have money down, typically 30%. I've seen lower, but that 30% threshold is what's typical with banks. So if your facility is worth $3 million, you may have to come up with 30% of that to be financed. The second issue with typical bank financing is that they typically don't like to go out beyond 20 years. 20 years is the max I've seen them go out. If you have a good relationship with somebody at the bank at the higher level, you may be able to go out 25, but 20 years is the typical length. And for CDFIs like IFF and LISC, it's usually 15 years, which also makes the payments a little bit higher and more difficult to service. Established schools, you get all the same options that we just discussed. You also qualify for tax-exempt bonds, which the benefit to tax-exempt bonds is that you can go out 30 to 35 years. While that has some interest implications, for a lot of schools, they'd rather have the longer tax liability for a short-term cash flow where the money can go immediately back to the classroom. And then you have national philanthropic funds. I think we discussed the Equitable Facilities Fund and the Facilities Investment Fund. Those are two models where large foundations will take out financing on your behalf through their credit, and you're able to get pretty competitive financing for a pretty long amortization. So I would say that if you qualify for any of those, that is the best product in the market right now for charter schools. I know that Paramount is in the process of being underwritten by them. The problem with those with those funds, not that there's a problem, but the barrier to them is that they have their pick of all schools across the country, and they like to pick what they deem to be a school that's going to be successful long term. So schools that really need the help don't qualify for those models, and they tend to favor schools that could get almost any other financing of their choosing are the ones that qualify for it. So that is a big barrier to entry with those two models. But if you're able to qualify for them, you know, there's it's a no-brainer to go with them. So those are the options for schools with positive enrollment trends. For schools with negative enrollment trends, if you're a school that is facing a downward trend, you can still access all the things that the new schools do, but you could still do what is called a private placement bond or social impact bonds. Those are typically a little bit higher interest, but you still get the benefit of the 35-year amortization rather than getting that 4 to 5% interest rate for 35 years. You may be in the 5.5 to 7%. So there are options for schools with negative trends, but it does come with an interest penalty. I'll pause there. So since I've been talking a lot to allow for any questions before moving on to the next slide. Nope. All right, moving on. And then the last set of options are for CMO network supported schools, which again, that you get all, if you're a network and you have a new school, you get the best of the best because you can leverage your entire network versus your new school. So you have a strong balance sheet that you can get almost any financing by using your entire network. But if you are a network and you are expanding but do not wish to use your network as support, again, all the same options as the last slide for for a new school would be the only options to use. So just because it has the name, let's say Paramount, and you decide not to back your new school with the network, you're still seen by the finance world as a brand new school because it still has to prove itself in the current model, if that makes sense. So if you don't have the support of the network, you're simply just a brand new school. All right. And this last one, this will be the last video, and it is around credit enhancement. Yeah, I think Jessica alluded to the fact that of that PR Mallory project that had multiple credit enhancements. It included credit enhancement from the city of Indianapolis, the Mine Trust, and some others. But let me go ahead and start this, and this will be the last video before you guys are free to go.
Credit enhancement. Unlike charter schools, public schools have the ability to support and fund their capital costs, such as facilities, by relying on income from local property taxes. While charter schools may not be able to rely on additional income from local property values directly, they can benefit by requesting credit enhancement support from their local taxing unit that does have the ability to levy taxes. Taxing units can include municipalities, school districts, and states. An alternative to placing the cost of the school facility on the taxpayer is to utilize the credit enhancement options available to a charter school. This scenario can be equated to if a parent decides to co-sign for a car. They lend their established credit and reliable payment history to the less established younger person, even though the younger person usually intends to pay it back themselves. Credit enhancement programs exist in many states in the US today: Colorado, Utah, Texas, and others. All employ credit enhancement strategies. In addition to state-supported credit enhancement programs, there are large CMOs and foundations that use their balance sheets to credit enhance the charter schools they support. But what if your charter school can't access this foundational enhancement, or is established in a state that doesn't support credit enhancement programs? If this is the case, the charter school can ask their local governing taxing body for assistance on their behalf. Here are the pros and cons to doing so. Pros: the charter school benefits from a substantially lower interest rate, which leads to savings for the classroom and school operations. Unlike district schools, property taxes are not the primary source of repayment, rather a backup or secondary source. Charter schools must still show the ability to repay the debt. The credit enhancement helps create strong, successful educational institutions and build an asset and investment in the community. Cons: requires elected officials to make a determination, which is sometimes influenced by political ideology rather than community benefit. If the charter school were to fail while secured by the real estate, the taxing unit would have to make annual payments on their behalf until the asset is liquidated or another school takes the place of the failed school. The decision to access credit enhancement will ultimately depend on the relationship between a charter school and their local taxing unit.
All right, and I think that was the last slide. So again, credit enhancement is a difficult thing. It really becomes very political, but every charter school has the ability to request credit enhancement from their local school board, their township, their county, their local city. But it does take a resolution from the governing body to do so. The fascinating thing is that this is something that happens and they do for developers, but they won't do for schools. So it is always fascinating that at the end of the day, ideology is what is the barrier to entry. We put together some language to try to get legislature in place to join states like Colorado or Utah that have these programs. Texas has a program that is backed by oil money. So if you're a school in Texas, a charter school, and you qualify for the credit enhancement, you can build pretty much anything because lenders feel pretty confident that that oil money is not going anywhere. So we don't have that luxury, but we could copy states like Colorado, where the legislature set aside a chunk of money just in case they ever had to make payments on the behalf of schools. And as part of the small fees that they charge the schools, they've been able to grow that fund where it's self-sufficient, and schools get similar credit as what a municipality or a public school would get. And Indiana's not quite there yet, but the ability to access local funds is still there. Depends on the relationship with your local bodies, and every school is different. Every board is different. So within your board, there might be somebody that is very politically tied, and it's always worth the conversation when thinking about this. But with that, this concludes our training, and we'll follow up with all of you to try and get the report done to make sure you guys are meeting all of the requirements, and any additional questions you may have then, you guys can ask those separately of your independent school when we make contact with you. Any final questions, comments about anything we covered?
Thank you so much for the information. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
No, you guys are welcome. And so with that said, I'll let you guys have the last 5 minutes of your time. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Good day.
Bye.